Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Kodak Kemuning Church of Christ Bible study. We shall begin by singing our first hymn. Onward bound, Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand by faith on heaven's stable land, a higher plane than I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. My heart has no desire to stay where doubts arise and fear dismay. Though some may dwell where disabound, my prayer, my aim is higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand by faith on heaven's stable land, a higher plane than I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. I want to scale the utmost high and catch a gleam of glory bright. But still I pray till hand I found. Lord, lead me on to higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand by faith on heaven's stable land, a higher plane than I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. Our next hymn is 350, Mansion Over the Hilltop. I'm satisfied with just a cottage below, a little silver and a little gold. But in that city where the ransom will shine, I wanna go on that silver line. I've got a mansion just over the hilltop, in that bright land where we'll never grow old. And someday yonder we will never more wander, but walk the streets that are pure as gold. Though often tempted, tormented and tested, and like the prophet, my pillow a stone. And though I find here no permanent dwelling, I know He'll give me a mansion my own. I've got a mansion just over the hilltop, in that bright land where we'll never grow old. And someday yonder we will never more wander, but walk the streets that are pure as gold. Don't think me poor or deserted or lonely. I'm not discouraged, I'm heaven bound. I'm just a pilgrim in search of a city. I want a mansion, a robe and a crown. I've got a mansion just over the hilltop, in that bright land where we'll never grow old. And someday yonder we'll never more wander, but walk the streets that are pure as gold. We have one more hymn before we have Brother Kelvin for the opening prayer. Hymn 485, Sweet Hour of Prayer. Sweet hour of prayer, sweet hour of prayer, that calls me from a world of care and bids me at my Father's throne make all my wants and wishes known. In seasons of distress and grief, my soul has often found relief and oft escaped the tempter's snare by thy return, sweet hour of prayer. Sweet hour of prayer, sweet hour of prayer, the joy I feel, the bliss I share of those whose anxious spirits burn with strong desires for thy return. With such I hasten to the place where God my Savior shows his face, and gladly take my station there and wait for thee, sweet hour of prayer. Sweet hour of prayer, sweet hour of prayer, thy wings shall my petition bear to him whose truth and faithfulness engage the waiting soul to bless. And since he bids me seek his face, believe his word and trust his grace, I'll cast on him my every care and wait for thee, sweet hour of prayer.
Brethren, let's pray together. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Father, thou, O Lord, art the awesome and almighty God. As we consider the things around us, the trees, the grass, the mountains, the living things and the non-living things on this earth, Father, we know that there is a creator for these things, and you, O Lord, are that creator. We're so grateful for the many things in life. We're so grateful for this avenue of prayer that we can bring forth our petition to you, but most importantly, to bring exaltation to your most holy and the most holy, almighty, and awesome name. Father, this morning we are so grateful that we're able to gather virtually to hear another portion of the word and to sing praises to thy holy name. This morning, as we hear a lesson from Brother Joshua as he continues on the book of Ecclesiastes. Father, as he presents his lesson to us this morning, pray and ask that you grant him the bonus and clarity of speech as he presents to us his lesson this morning. Father, as Christians, as sojourners of this earth, we are reminded that we are just this world is just a temporary place. We're just a pilgrim here. Father, as we live our life on this earth, that we continue to reflect on our actions to be a better Christian each day of our life. But as we hear a lesson from Brother Joshua, we pray and ask that we, of humility of hearts as well as an open mind, as we reflect upon ourselves on our Christian journey, to be better Christian each day, to not just focus on the things we ought, to not just focus on the grand prize that's awaiting us at the end of this life. Father, be with us as we pursue this hour of Bible class. This is a humble prayer in Christ and pray in us. Amen.
All right, thank you so much, Brother Kevin, for the prayer. And good morning to everyone else who's joining us today from wherever you may be. I hope you're safe and sound. We are continuing our series on the book of Ecclesiastes, and I'm covering chapter 2 from the introduction and chapter 1 by Brother Kevin. So let's get started and let's jump into the book of Ecclesiastes. Now, the very famous phrase that repeats again and again in the book of Ecclesiastes is all is vanity, all vanity of vanities. And the book is really a meditation by Solomon on what it means to struggle as a human being. So it's a very intimate and personal book. And the word vanity that reappears so many times in the book of Ecclesiastes is actually quite hard to translate in a way. It's actually from the word hebel in Hebrew, which literally means breath or vapor. So it would be quite a different phrase or saying if the translators took a literal approach and said all is breath or all is vapor or vapor is vapor or everything is vapor or everything is breath. It would perhaps catch the literal meaning but not quite the figurative meaning that Solomon was going for. And the reason why it's translated vanity, or in more modern translations, meaninglessness or meaningless, is because it captures the idea that breath itself is so impossible to control and so fleeting. Or vapor itself is something that just comes and goes. So implicit in understanding the idea of vanity or meaningless is also the idea that Solomon was also trying to grapple with the idea of his own mortality and human mortality and the limits of human life. And we see that implicit or subtextual in many of the passages that we will read today, and in continuing the series, the book of Ecclesiastes, we'll see him questioning things about why he does certain things in life and how it actually ends up being meaningless because he dies. He will die and he will not be able to take it with him, and he will not be able to control what happens to it after that. Now, this is a very, of course, heavy topic, and it's a very I'm looking out my window now, and it's quite a dreary Sunday morning. You're blessed to have it, but it's still quite cozy, and some of you might be feeling a bit sleepy still, not quite awakened from your own slumber. So I just want to start the class with something a little bit more lighthearted, if you don't mind joining me. We will use a poll site called Poll EV, or Poll Everywhere. If you could go to pollev.com/Joshua Chong 083, and we will use this poll system or this poll site to just gather some answers. And it's lighthearted fun, so don't worry about using your name. In fact, I encourage you to sign in with your name. So I'll just give you a few seconds to go to that on your phone, perhaps, or even your laptop if you're using your laptop or your computer, and just sign into that with your name, and we will start with the poll. So the first one I wanted to start with is this question here. So I want you to look at the lyrics here and guess the song. Now, if you can guess, there are 3 questions. If you can guess all the songs correctly and all the bands or singers, you will get possibly a coffee from me when we are able to meet again in person, although I can't promise when that will be. But if you get a winning streak, so to speak, of three song titles and 3 band names or singers' names, then yes, coffee on me when we next meet. Okay, so the first song I want you to look at the lyrics. Now, some of you may have been young when this came out, but it's not a new song. So I'm opening this, and feel free to just suggest certain answers in the poll EV. So I've activated the question as well. Feel free to suggest the song title as well as the singer or the band. Okay, I'm just going to leave the leave the question open for a while. So far, no one has been able to guess. It's quite easy because it's actually in the song. The song title is in the lyrics itself. Okay, I'll leave it for a few more seconds. Seems like no one's able to guess yet. Yes, someone's got it. Okay, so it's I Can't Get No Satisfaction by the Rolling Stones. So whoever got that, okay, first correct answer. And it's written in 1965. Okay, so quite a relatively old song by today's radio standards. Okay, the next song I want to look at is this song. You can read that, and I will shortly activate the next question. Okay, so I've activated the question. Song and band singer or singer number 2. Nope, it's not Only to Be With You, whoever answered that. Yes, someone got it right. I still haven't found what I'm looking for. And it's by U2, Irish band. And this song was launched in 1987 in their album The Joshua Tree. So from the 80s, we've got a song from the 80s and we've got a song from the 60s. Okay, last one. A much shorter lyric. Okay, let me just deactivate the question and move on to the next question. And I'll show the lyric. Please don't cheat and use Google. You should be answering this off the top of your head, otherwise it doesn't count. Okay, so I've opened the question on the poll EV. So feel free to suggest a song title as well as a singer or band. This one might suit our younger viewers a bit better. It's a fairly recent song. There's a hint there. It's definitely not from the 60s or the 80s. Someone got the name of the singer right, but you might want to guess again with the name of the song. It is Billie Eilish. Okay, if there are no takers, I'm going to leave it for maybe 10 seconds more. Okay, looks like no one's able to catch the title. No worries. Someone got the name of the singer correct. It is actually called Getting Older, and it's by Billie Eilish. And it's from this year. It's a very new song. Ironically, Billie Eilish is only 19 years old. So when she writes this, she's perhaps just starting her journey of grappling with the meaningless of life, so to speak. But all three bands and singers were and are actually very successful musical acts. And these were all songs written by themselves or by someone in the band. And it reflects that it's a universal feeling, right? This feeling of not just universal, but also something that doesn't go away through time, right? Even as we read in the book of Ecclesiastes that life is meaningless, life is like a vapor, life is like breath. We have people in our modern age, in the 60s and the 80s, and even today, writing similar feelings and facing similar struggles. And these people too are in a way conventionally successful, the same way that we would see Solomon back then. They have fame, they have a lot of wealth, they have a lot of influence, they have adoring fans, but they too are not spared grappling with this problem. And as Solomon himself wrote, there is nothing new under the sun. Right? He writes in the book of Ecclesiastes quite a few times this phrase, this aphorism. And in fact, if you look at human history, it is something that we have grappled with from the start, right? That this feeling that life is so dissatisfying and so limited, and human life is so much like something that you can't control. Your mortality is not something you can control. The Epic of Gilgamesh is the oldest known piece of literature, human literature, on the planet. Right? It is written the source material is written about 2,000 years before Christ. So it predates even the Bible in terms of the writing date. And very interestingly, one of the source materials for the poem actually says in ancient times, in the years before. So can you imagine that the oldest poem or the oldest piece of literature in humanity actually talks about a time even before that? There's a line in one of this epic poem of Gilgamesh that says, "As for human beings, their days are numbered, and whatever they keep trying to achieve is but wind." So even 2,000 years before the coming of Christ, people have already written down their struggle with how fleeting life is, how hard to control, how limited their bodies are, their lives are, how mortal they are. And Solomon wrote that perhaps a lot more eloquently and a lot more in depth in the book of Ecclesiastes. When he started by saying, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity." He questions what labor is, and he says there is nothing new under the sun. Everything that has been is what will be. That which is done is what will be done. So he talks about the cycle of life, as Brother Kevin had pointed out in his last lesson, how it repeats and repeats and repeats again. And he perceived that things were also grasped. Even his own struggle to get, or his own endeavors to get wisdom and knowledge, was also grasping for the wind. Even his highest achievement, we've always called him Solomon the Wise. Even his highest accolade, right? Not even his physical achievements, but his ability to attain wisdom. Even that, he said, was grasping for the wind. So he says in the book of Ecclesiastes chapter 2, he says this. He says, "I said to my heart, come now, I will test you with mirth." He says, "I will test you with mirth," as if he's giving his heart a challenge to see, let's see what good mirth can do. And mirth is obviously, overflowing enjoyment, right? Overflowing luxury, well, not luxury, but enjoyment of a specific thing, and usually it's a physical thing, right? So he said, "Therefore enjoy pleasure." But he then quickly says, "Surely this also was vanity." And he said to laughter, madness, to mirth, what does it accomplish? So after doing that test, he concludes that these things are also madness. These things are also unable to accomplish anything, unable to satisfy the spiritual needs of the heart. And he said, "I searched in my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine, while guarding my heart with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the sons of men to do under heaven all the days of their life." So he's almost taking a very, you could say, a sardonic tone, or an ironic tone, that he wanted to try out all the good things in life, right? To have mirth, to gratify his flesh with pleasure, with wine, to see whether it's actually good for other people to do. You could almost say it's like an experiment for him to see whether these are good things for mankind to do. So let's go back to the poll again. I'm going to the next question, and I want you to try to guess some of the pleasures, or try to suggest some of the pleasures which we enjoy or seek to enjoy, or humanity seeks to enjoy today. Now, of course, in Solomon's time, it was music, it was wine, it was his wives. He had many wives, so his perhaps central pleasures. He had those to sort of, as he said, gratify his flesh. What are the things that today people would seek to gratify themselves? Not necessarily just the flesh, but themselves. So I'm going to open the poll EV, and if you go back to pollev.com/Joshua Chong 083, feel free to suggest some answers. I've just activated the question. Sorry, I didn't activate it before. pollev.com/Joshua Chong 083. What are some examples of modern day pleasures which people seek? So I'm going to leave that up for a while we think about this. I will just go back and show this verse from chapter 2 of Ecclesiastes while you suggest those answers. Crypto gains. Someone suggested crypto gains. Okay. Lots of great answers. Money, food, socializing, travel, video games, love. Love is an interesting one. Alcohol, drugs, sex, violence, adultery, happiness. Okay. Well, the question is, what do people do to so-called gain happiness? Having their DM seen by their favorite celeb, that is truly a 21st century pleasure. Perhaps very much the 2020, 2021 pleasure. Entertainment, food, cars, beauty. Someone said with friends, not sure what that means. Go to space, also a very 2021 answer. Gambling, lust. Okay, lots of really great answers. So I'm just going to close the answers for now so that we can go on. Going to the moon. Well, no one's gone to the moon on a private rocket yet, although they've gone on national missions. So let's look at that, and very much reflective of what you've answered. I've also suggested similar things like food, and people wanting the latest best food and showing it off. Luxuries like, perhaps bags or clothes or other symbols of wealth and prosperity. Entertainment, that came out quite a few times as well. So like video games perhaps, or even what we view online or in the cinema, although of course now the cinemas are closed. Another one is praise of others. So sometimes we do things, or people do things to get praise of others, and sometimes it can even be something that seems good at first, or that seems selfless at first, like helping others, but it is to get not the gratification of being able to help someone in need, but the gratification of your peers and society praising you for what you did. So perhaps the outcome is good, but the intention not so much. Okay, so those are some of the modern day pleasures that we have, but the end, or rather the starting point, whether you are Solomon or you are someone in this age in 2021, it's quite the same, right? It's the insecurity of the self. It's the seeking of sensuous pleasures and the feeding of the ego. So let's look at the next passage in Ecclesiastes. Solomon talks about his many, many achievements, and I've added them here even beyond what he listed down. So in verse 4 to verse 8, or in fact verse 9, he lists his many achievements. In verse 9, He says, "So I became great and excelled more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me." And he names his many, many, many achievements, and it stops at number 10, but I've also listed number 11 to number 14. He had houses, he had vineyards, he had gardens. He had orchards with all kinds of fruits. He had male and female servants or slaves. He had herds and flocks of cattle more than anyone else in Jerusalem. He had silver and gold. He had treasures of kings and provinces. He had male and female singers. He had musical instruments. And those were not his only achievements, which he listed here. His achievements, which he did not list here, include the fact that he built the temple, that he established trade and diplomacy with kingdoms around Israel. He had an army, and he wrote many psalms and proverbs. So he is, to put it very not bluntly, but to put it in perhaps more easy to understand terms, an extreme overachiever. Okay, he was not a king that just sat around and expected things to happen to him. He was someone who really achieved very much in his life, commanded a lot of respect, a lot of admiration, a lot of authority as well, and certainly brought prosperity to his citizens and his subjects. So he said, after listing all these things down, that he was great and excelled more than anyone before him in Jerusalem. So he was the greatest, so to speak, up to that point in time. But of course, as we know in his reflections in the book of Ecclesiastes, well, none of this quite satisfied him. None of this quite gave him the lasting ego boost, so to speak, that perhaps he craved. So, I've already unfortunately answered one question. So what are some of the modern day great works that people seek to have in this life or to achieve in this life? I'm going to turn on to the next question. I'm going to activate that. So if you go back to your poll, EV/Joshua Chong 083, I'm going to ask the last question for today, the last interactive question at least. What are some examples of modern day achievements which people try to achieve today? Now, of course, maybe you might not want to collect treasures of kings and provinces. You definitely should not have slaves. You may not build a temple or have an army, but there are perhaps more personal and modern day examples. Someone suggested having a family. That's interesting. Buildings, yeah. Wealth and fame. Having a family is certainly a very interesting suggestion. There's a question mark there. So that's perhaps something worth discussing, whether we have a family because we believe that's what God's will and we want to share a family life with people, our spouse, and our children, or whether it is something that we want to achieve for ourselves, for our own gratification, perhaps to avoid people looking down on us. Olympic medals, interesting. Having children who are doctors, engineers, or lawyers, definitely a very quote-unquote Asian achievement and a very modern day one. A longer lifespan, that's something that was perhaps an option for Solomon, but Solomon was wise. He asked for wisdom, and God said that you didn't ask for a long lifespan, instead you asked for wisdom. That was accounted for him. Very good thing. The Oscars, heights of career, numbers of likes on social media. Someone also answered getting top voted in a Reddit post. Reddit is a news aggregation and post aggregation site where you can contribute items and people can vote for you. Having your vid go viral. So very, very, really great examples from the modern day. You quite hit the mark with very 2021 answers. Achievements of our dream career. So that repeats a few times. Accumulation of assets, wealth. Someone suggested successfully getting PR in Australia. Also a very Asian 21st century achievement, so to speak. win the Nobel Prize. Okay, I know some of these are very tongue-in-cheek, so I hope it doesn't upset anyone. But these are all quite interesting suggestions, right? And some of them are very quote unquote big achievements, and some of them are perhaps a little more frivolous, like getting a viral video online. So, intelligence like Albert Einstein. Okay, good luck with that. Vaccine. Well, not sure if that's an achievement if you get it for free, but perhaps for those people who are finding it difficult to achieve. Okay, the poll's full, unfortunately, so I can't take more answers, but very interesting answers from everyone. I'm going to leave it there so that you can look at the questions. So you look at the answers that have been suggested. So yes, all those are very valid answers, and instead of this list of perhaps 10 things that we would seek today, none of us would probably want to grow a vineyard, and in Malaysia that's close to impossible. It's close to impossible to grow grapes. But the modern day versions would be, property and infrastructure. So someone suggested buildings, right? The tallest building. That's very much something that happens today, right? You want to own a great building, a great house, or perhaps as a business tycoon, you want the biggest, tallest, newest building. Career achievements were also listed, right? You want to have perhaps a very big company. You want to expand your company from a small 5-person company to a 10-person, and then 100-person, and then 1,000-person, right? You want to list your company on the stock exchange. You want to be a CEO. So career achievements, also quote unquote, an example of a great achievement in our modern day context. Another one would be collections of things, right? Or ownership, a collection of wealth, collection of luxury items, right? You want to have the latest, newest, biggest, most expensive, most impressive technology, vehicles, or in the case of some people, you want the latest toy which takes you to space. Power, fame, and influence. For sure, I don't know why this wasn't hidden before, but that's another thing that people want to achieve these days. Perhaps in the age of social media more so than ever, right? You want to win awards, you want to win even prizes, you want to represent people. For example, if you're a politician, you want to represent more and more people, or you want a certain number of followers on your social media, or your vid to go viral. Now, don't get me wrong, none of these are inherently wrong or sinful in themselves, right? It's not wrong to own a house. It's not wrong to run a big company or to have your company listed in the stock exchange, right? It's not wrong to own technology or even to go, it's not inherently wrong to go to space, right? Or to win awards, to win prizes. I mean, a lot of these actually take a lot of hard work, a lot of knowledge. But the point is that Solomon had, all these great things, right? He had this long, long list of almost extra-human or superhuman achievements. Right? He was an overachiever of the century, you could say. And yet, he found that none of these really satisfied him. None of this really made him happy. He said in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, and from verse 10 onwards, he said, "Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure. For my heart rejoiced in all my labor. This was my reward from all my labor. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had done, and the labor in which I had toiled, and indeed all was vanity and grasping for the wind. There was no profit under the sun." And it's so, it's very touching when he says this, because he's a man who has, quote unquote, has it all. He has it all. He had it all, and he didn't steal it, so to speak. He worked for it. He said that I was happy to work. My heart rejoiced in my labor, and this was my reward. I got what I worked for. But then the scripture takes a different turn when he uses the word then. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had done. What he looked at his great kingdom, his many achievements, his wealth, his vineyards, his orchards, his servants, his collection of musical instruments. And he looked at the work that had led him to that point. And he said, verily, or very much so, when I look at these things, it was just meaningless. It was breath. My temple, well, not his temple, but the temple he built, the trade that he had started, the army he had, it was all just vanity. It was grasping for the wind. And you can try grasping for the wind. Even today, if you feel a breeze, you can't hold it in your hand. You can't control it. It just is something that's not within your reach. He even goes so far as to say, there's no profit, there's no benefit to any of all this. I have had it all, and all of it was nothing. It accounted to nothing. So it's quite bleak, actually, when you think about it. But of all people, perhaps he was the most entitled, so to speak, or privileged, so to speak, to be able to come to this conclusion without anyone questioning him. Right? There's a joke that says, all I want is for a chance to prove that money isn't everything. So someone who doesn't have money will say, I know money isn't everything, but I want to enjoy money first, and then I can tell you that money isn't everything. But he really was someone who was extremely wealthy, extremely successful. No one can say, Allah, you don't know what you're talking about. You say all this is meaningless, but you don't have anything to show for it anyway. So what is it that you have to say this is meaningless when your this isn't very much to account for? But he really had it all, and he really still come to this. And the other thing is that unlike many other people who have achieved as much or perhaps even more than him, is that he had wisdom. He had wisdom, and even as Ecclesiastes says, he clung to that wisdom stuck to him. The wisdom that God gave him stuck to him. And this conclusion, so to speak, comes also from his wisdom. It also comes from his perhaps later day wisdom that is coupled with a reflection on the limits of achievement. He questioned wisdom and foolishness. If we go back to our passage today, we look at what he said in verse 12. And he said, I turned myself to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do? For what can the man do who succeeds the king? Only what he has already done. Then I saw that wisdom exceeds folly, and light excels folly, and light excels darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. Yet I myself perceive that the same event happens to them all. So I said in my heart, as it happens to the fool, it also happens to me. And why was I then more wise? Then I said in my heart, this also is vanity. Verse 16, for there is no more remembrance of the wise than of the fool forever, since all that now is will be forgotten in the days to come. And how does a wise man die? As the fool. So he compared foolishness to wisdom. He considered these things and ruminated on these things. He considered wisdom and madness and folly. He said wisdom is better than foolishness. Sorry, it should be wisdom is better than foolishness on that PowerPoint, and it excels or exceeds folly. So he's not saying that it's better to be foolish. He's not saying that foolishness is good. We should aim to be dumb and foolish, and to be ignorant of God's will or of God's commandments. That's not what he's suggesting. But he's saying, okay, I have all this wisdom, but I'm constrained by the same circumstances as someone who's foolish. Who will succeed me, and what will he do? He will just do the same things that I've done. It's such a pointless cycle of life. I'm the king now. I'm a great king, the greatest that ever was, so to speak. But the king that comes after me, what will he do? He will still have an army. He will still maintain the temple. He will still rule the kingdom. And I've already done that before. So there's nothing new in that sense. Again, nothing new under the sun. And I'm wise, but what happens to me is the same thing that happens to the foolish. So what's the point of all this wisdom? Right? He's questioning even the limits of his so-called greatest achievement, which is wisdom. Even that has a limiting point. Even that can't entirely satisfy. He reflects that, wait a minute, the wise and the foolish die the same way. The wise aren't spared death. The foolish die, sure, you might expect that, but the wise die too. And the same thing happens to them. Right? They're not spared from the ravages of death. And the wise and the foolish are both forgotten over time. So sure, we might adore wisdom and we might praise wisdom, but in the longer span of things, the wise and the foolish are also forgotten. Just like we remember one of the first slides, 2,000 years ago, 2,000 years before Christ came, so that was 4,000 years ago, people had already said the same thing, right? That life is so short and whatever we try to achieve is grasping for the wind. And our wisdom today, I mean, just as we reflect on the song lyrics that our modern day songs minstrels have written, we are but a drop in the ocean of human history, and we are so small in that sense. Our lives, even collectively as an entire nation or an entire planet, is actually very, very short. We are limited by our short-sightedness and the limits and the constraints of time and the constraints of our own ignorance. But when we learn from the wisdom literature of the Old Testament, such as Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, we see that a lot of things don't change as well. Some of the questions that we've asked 2,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, remain the same. Some of the things we grapple with are the same. And that's why I think the book of Ecclesiastes is so endearing to so many people who perhaps struggle with spiritual restlessness and spiritual dissatisfaction. And again, it was not as if Solomon was just a random person in the street. He had a very close relationship with God for much of his life, even if not all of his life, for much of his life. He was not someone God ignored or who ignored God. He was very close to God. And yet, he still grappled with these same things, right? So it's not just people who are in the secular world who grapple with this. Even people who are Christians might struggle with the same feelings that Solomon struggled with. And perhaps now, in a time of isolation, in a time of a global pandemic, we feel that again. We feel that life is so short, so meaningless, so difficult to control. People are dying everywhere. It feels so futile, right? It feels that everything is but a breath. Everything is but a vapor. So, Solomon asked himself, what is so great about wisdom? Right? People praise me for my wisdom. They call me Solomon the Great. But what's so great about it? I die like everyone else. People will forget me eventually. People have forgotten wise men of the past. People will forget wise men in the future. No different from a fool. So he then goes on even further. He says in verse 17, I hated all my labor in which I had toiled under the sun, because I must leave it to the man who will come after me. So he grapples with the futility of even his legacy. Even if, yes, he's built this great empire, this great kingdom, brought so much stability to his citizens, his subjects. But what happens is, who will be the next king? Will it be someone wise or will it be someone foolish? He asks himself in verse 19, and who knows whether he will be a wise or a fool, yet he will rule over all my labor in which I toiled, and in which I have shown myself wise under the sun. This also is vanity. And in verse 20, he turned his heart and despaired of all the labor in which he had toiled under the sun. So he says, who's going to be the next king? Is it going to be someone wise like me, or is it going to be someone foolish? I don't know. I can't control that. And if he's foolish, it's going to be so ironic because I built all this up with my wisdom. I worked so hard to achieve all these. And what do I get? Just some king who comes after me, who is going to just enjoy the fruits of my labor. He didn't even lift a finger, right? He'll rule over all that I work for. He says in the book of Ecclesiastes, he's got wisdom, he's got knowledge, he's got skill, and he used all this to build all the great achievements that he had to show for. But he's just going to leave it to someone who's done nothing for it. So again, he grapples with even a great legacy. Right? People say that, it's not what I achieve, but what I leave to the next generation. That is great, and it sounds very noble to us, right? Wow, talk about legacy. Again, there's nothing wrong with leaving a good legacy. In fact, we should all aim to leave the world a little better than when we first came, so to speak. But there is a limit to that. There is a limit to how much that can bring us spiritual satisfaction. And Solomon, if anyone else had something, had a right to say this, it was him. He left a great legacy, but even then, it was not something that spiritually satisfied him. He asks, what has man for all his labor and for the striving of his heart, which he has toiled under the sun? For all his days are sorrowful and his work burdensome. Even in the night his heart takes no rest. This also is vanity. Now this is a verse that I think anyone, and I admit I'm one of them who is a workaholic, can relate to. Right, verse 22 of Ecclesiastes chapter 2. Someone who has worked late nights will be able to see this, or even if you don't work late nights, you're worried at night about your work, right? And you feel so tired and exhausted from your labor, right? And you might even do labor for good things, right? You might want to give your family a better life. You might want to donate some of your money to charity, or you might want to help support the church with the money that you've accumulated. But that doesn't detract from the fact that it is labor. It is difficult. It is striving. It's toil. And Solomon observes that those who do such work, his days are sorrowful and his work is burdensome, and there's no rest for him, even at night. And this also is meaningless. Ultimately, he finds that labor itself, which we look up to and we gratify, and we say that there's dignity in labor, and it's true, there is dignity in labor, but there is no ultimate spiritual satisfaction in labor, right? No matter how much labor we do, whether it's low end, so quote unquote low end or low wage labor, or very high wage or high end labor, it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, it cannot give us spiritual fulfillment, which is why Solomon said this also is vanity. And lastly, he observes that pleasure cannot give meaning, right? He's already talked about so much of what he's been able to enjoy, but in verse 24 he says nothing is better than for a man than he should eat and drink, and that his soul should enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw was from the hand of God. For who can eat or who can have enjoyment more than I? For God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight. But to the sinner he gives the work of gathering and collecting, that he may give to him who is good before God. This also is vanity and grasping for the wind. So a very strange passage considering what he's just said. First he said that all these things are meaningless, all these things can't bring us good. But yet in verse 24, he seems to sort of shift his focus a bit, or shift his message a bit, to say that nothing is better for a man that he should eat and drink, and that his soul should enjoy in his labor. So he's saying, wait, so you kind of ask Solomon, wait, are you saying it's good or are you saying it's bad? What are you saying? I'm confused right now. But actually, no, Solomon was just saying that it's good to, in his view, to enjoy the pleasures that God has given. It's good to take enjoyment in work. After all, this comes from God, right? This was something that God ordained, right? That man should enjoy a certain amount of pleasure, certain amount of satisfaction in his work. This is not something that God is against. This is, in fact, from the hand of God. So it's designed by God or given by God. And then he asks, after all, if anyone can say this, who else other than me? It's almost like a very tongue-in-cheek way of saying that. But I'm more qualified than anyone else to tell you that, yeah, I've enjoyed it all, and I can say, yeah, we should enjoy this. And he says that, God gives wisdom and knowledge to those which are good in his sight, but to the sinner he gives toil, right? Gathering and collecting. But he still concludes that, at the end of the day, even pleasure from things that are in a way allowed by God or permitted by God, even pleasure and work cannot give ultimate meaning, cannot give spiritual satisfaction. So there's nothing better than all this. And he enjoyed life most of all, but yet he cannot say that, yes, after having done this, after having achieved this, after having enjoyed this, that's what you should do. So if there was a test, like he said at the earlier part of the chapter, I tested my heart with mirth. If there was a test for pleasure, then pleasure failed that test, because he does not conclude that, yes, while he concludes that, yes, it's good for mankind to enjoy this, it's still not good enough. It's still not good to satisfy the heart in a spiritual sense, in an existential sense, so to speak. There has to be more to life than just enjoying these things, enjoying these work, and enjoying the fruits of the labor that we've done. So he says that he was given much wisdom and knowledge. He was alluding to himself. And the sinners were given much toil. And perhaps he was reflecting on the fact that people worked for him. He had slaves, he had servants, he had a huge army that worked for him. And perhaps he was reflecting on the fact that even as someone who is seen as good by God, and even as someone who is given this opportunity to have so many people serving under him, and he looks at all these servants and he doesn't say, yeah, well done, Solomon, good on me, pat on my own back for being in control of all these servants and having all these people toil for him. He says that actually even that is vanity, even that is so meaningless, right? Now, of course, the conclusion that Solomon reaches is really at the end of the book of Ecclesiastes, and I will not steal the thunder of whoever is covering Ecclesiastes chapter 12. Stick with us through this series. You will see that meaninglessness isn't just a question in Ecclesiastes. It is also a question that has an answer and a conclusion. But we just have to go through a lot of reflection and a lot of rumination before we get to that answer that conclusion that Solomon had. And I'm taking this part here, this really nice graph or diagram that Brother Kevin used last week. And he showed man's aspirations, right? Wealth, wisdom, power, honor. That hasn't changed in 4,000 years. Even in the Epic of Gilgamesh, right? We read about perhaps not wisdom, but wealth, power, and honor were things that the ancient people wanted to seek. Right? They wanted stability, they wanted wealth, they wanted power by building great cities, they wanted honor. These were things that 4,000 years ago people had already written about. And what do you expect from that? What does humankind expect to get out of that? Joy, happiness, contentment, satisfaction, comfort. These are all very quote-unquote logical things to expect from your aspirations and from achieving your aspirations. But the fact is, the actual outcome of someone who has all of this, who had wealth, who had wisdom, who had power, who had honor, aka Solomon himself, that's not what he got. He didn't get joy, happiness, contentment, satisfaction, and comfort. He got the opposite. He got despair, he got despondency, he felt hopelessness, he felt dissatisfaction, continual dissatisfaction. He felt unease, and he felt futility. So the conventional wisdom of 4,000 years is the same, but perhaps people still haven't wisened up that the expected outcome isn't what we're going to get from our aspirations. The aspirations of millennia of humankind is the same, and the expected outcome is the same, but we haven't wisened up that actually, no, this is not going to give us what we think it's going to give us. It's going to give us the opposite. It's going to give us a feeling that after all of it, it's still pretty futile. So at the end of the day, Solomon declares here in Ecclesiastes chapter 2 and elsewhere throughout the book of Ecclesiastes that this is vanity, all this is meaningless, all this is breath, all this is vapor, and it's grasping for the wind. So what can we learn from this? We can learn that our achievements, even noble achievements, even achievements which people might look up to, like maybe even winning an award, right? Award, an academic award or a career award. I mean, that's not something anyone will say, oh, what a waste of effort, right? That's something that people would praise, but at the end of the day, it's not going to give you ultimate spiritual satisfaction. Likewise with pleasure, even wisdom cannot give us ultimate meaning in life. Only a relationship with God and obedience to Him will fulfill that. But I will not say anything more than that. That's a reflection for the closing chapter of the book of Ecclesiastes. I thank you so much for joining me on this lesson. It's truly a great journey to go into the mind of Solomon in his latter years when he reflects back on his life. And I hope that you've learned something from today. And I hope that you've benefited even a bit of what I've benefited, because I've learned so much from preparing this lesson. Thank you very much. I will now hand the lesson back to Brother Calvin, who will end us with a closing prayer.
Brethren, let's pray as we close this morning's Bible class. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. As we close this morning's Bible class, as we look at the second chapter of the book of Ecclesiastes, we are so grateful for Brother Joshua, who has share his lesson on this chapter. But as we go through life, we are so grateful for the many things, the things that we have, both wisdom as well as the physical blessings. But we know that, Father, from your servant Solomon, as what he expounded to us in the second chapter of Ecclesiastes, that all these things are in vain. But Father, we don't forget that these blessings are from thee, from above, that as we continue to have these blessings, that we continue to use it each day to the people around us, as well as to shine a light in the people around us, and to use it wisely for the fragrance of your word. But we're so as Brother Josh continued to serve in this capability, with his capability in the congregation, we pray and ask that you may grant him many years of service in your vineyard here and wherever he goes. But as we conclude this morning's Bible class, that we pray and ask that you be with us as we take a short break before we start our worship of this morning. We pray and ask that our worship of this morning, that is one that is acceptable and one that is pleasing upon your sight. That this is a humble prayer in Christ's name, pray and ask. Amen.